Well, good morning, ladies and gentlemen. We have seen some we've talked about technological developments, but an important aspect, I think, is financing the European road infrastructure. And I would like to start this presentation by giving you some facts and figures regarding road network and road transport in Europe. The total length of the road network in Europe is around 5 million kilometers. And if we look at how the road sector contributes to the economy, in terms of direct jobs, we are talking about 5 million jobs or something like 5% of the EU GDP. And if we also include the indirect jobs, we reach 14 million jobs and 11% of the EU GDP. And according to a study that we have done inside the ERF, this is one of the major, if not the major community asset with an estimated replacement value of 8,000 billion or 8 trillion euros. Now let's look at the current situation. In terms of inland transport, freight transport, the road carries something like 72% of the freight transport in Europe. And if we look at passenger transport, we have 72.3% made with cars. But if we add power two-wheelers, buses and coaches, some 82% of the passenger transport within the EU is made on roads. So roads are definitely very important for our economy and our society. And another interesting point is that if we look at the evolution forecast, be it for passenger transport or for freight transport activity, the major increase from now until 2030 will happen on roads. So we already have a large proportion of the transport which is made on roads, and if we look at the evolution, even more and more transport for passengers and for freight will happen on our roads. So it is absolutely necessary to have roads in good condition. So in order to have roads in good condition, we need to think about how we can finance them. And there was, I remember someone giving a presentation during one of our events who said, no money, no honey. And thank you, Michael, you told me that I could say that in German, kein Geld, keine Musik, which relates to my musical activities. But let's look at the current situation of the road, the transport financing, generally speaking. The transport infrastructure for all modes of transport has never been as low now since the 70s. In the 70s, we had something like 1.5% of the GDP which was dedicated to the financing of the transport infrastructure. And now we have reached a situation where the point is below 1%. And if we look at this graph, here the Western European countries, the Central and Eastern European countries, we see that we are under the OECD average, and the trend everywhere shows a decrease towards 2013, and the situation has not improved since then. So how can we invest less in the transport infrastructure and at the same time give the possibility for an increased traffic, especially on roads, to perform? Another worrying element is that the general transport infrastructure investment has lowered, but the part dedicated to road has also become more important compared to, for example, here, rail in Western European countries. So not only the global package, the global amount of money has reduced, but the part dedicated to road has also been reduced. So let's try to look at the road transport with a European perspective, and more specifically about the European transport network, Trans-European Transport Network, which depends on the European Commission policy. And this transport network has the objective of implement and develop a Europe-wide network, including roads, railways, inland waterways, different transport modes, maritime roads, land transport, and railroad terminals. It has two different parts, the comprehensive network and the core network. The comprehensive network englobes all the regions of Europe and should be completed by 2050. And the core network, the most important one, is to be completed by 2030, and it represents the most important connections within the comprehensive network. And, well, this map, many of you are probably very familiar with the description of the different transport corridors and the TEN-T network in Europe. What are the main sources of financing? Again, talking about the European perspective. Well, you probably have heard about the Connecting Europe Facility plan, which has been put in place by the new Commission, with a budget of 24 billion for the period of 2014 to 2020, but that money is mainly going to be to go into the railway. There are some EU structural funds, mainly for road projects, but they more concern Eastern countries and Central European countries. The national funds, and we all know that, are very limited. There are obviously the road pricing schemes, which are pushed by the European Commission because they consider that they would be the only long-term viable alternative to other forms of financing. And I would like to give you some information about the new proposal on the what they call the Eurovignette Directive. So originally, in 1999, the European Commission issued this directive, the 1962, for charging the use of the infrastructure, of certain infrastructures, for heavy-duty vehicles. The original scope was to apply this system to vehicles over 3.5 tons, but very often in the practice it was only applied to vehicles over 12 tons, and with some purpose of ensuring some level playing field for different transport operators. But again, I would like to say that this proposal doesn't force the member states to apply the road charging schemes. It just creates a potential framework for the application. Because there is a major problem of financing the road infrastructure, the revision of the European directive has proposed to phase out the existing system, which is a time-based. So you pay for a certain period of time independently on the use, the real use that you do of the infrastructure. And they propose to phase out that for heavy-duty vehicles by 2023 and for cars and vans by 2027. So the idea is to go from a system time-based to a distance-based charging system, which is more logical. You pay for what you use. That's a pay-per-use concept. And they would propose to extend the charging system to all types of vehicles, including the cars, vans, buses, and coaches, with the removal of this possibility to exempt the heavy-duty vehicles below 12 tons. So all the vehicles would pay for the use they do of the infrastructure. This new Eurovignette proposal also includes a revision of the different calculation methods on how you are going to calculate the amount that you will pay for the use of the infrastructure with different road user charges, and give some incentive for cleaner vehicles. And that proposal also includes a possibility to charge not only the simple use of the infrastructure, but also to introduce some other charges, for example, areas where there is a huge issue of noise, or for areas where there's a specific issue due to pollution, and to introduce congestion charges. But what I think is really interesting and which needs to be underlined in this new proposal of the revision of the Eurovignette Directive is that for the very first time in the rationale of the proposal, the European Commission refers to the dramatic condition, the degradation of the road infrastructure in many countries because of lack of investment for its maintenance. And they also note the constant decrease of the public spending on maintenance and all the negative impacts in terms of social impact, economic impact, environmental impact that this lack of investment in the road infrastructure can have for the global society. Of course, this new directive proposal will have to go through different phases of discussion and negotiations between the European Parliament, the Council, and it will be a long-term process. And we already know that probably the most critical step will be the discussion within the Council, because very few member states would give the green light to a system where they have to come to their citizens and say, you will have to pay for the use of the infrastructure. So politically, it's much more difficult for the countries to bring that idea to their population. We are just about to release a position paper about this proposed revision, and I'd like to give you some of the points that we would like to mention. Globally, we welcome the principles of the new proposal because we go from a time-based to a user-pays principle. So you pay for a usage that you do of the road infrastructure. So going from a time-based to a distance-based system. Because we also welcome the principle because there is a clear mention of the necessity of maintaining the road infrastructure. It might have a positive impact on all our construction and maintenance road sector, including the markings. It also promotes more sustainable mobility, and it will help providing the road user and the citizen with a better quality roads and a better service on the roads. But, of course, there are some buts into this proposal. And the most worrying one is that there is absolutely no indication on how the revenue that is going to be levied with this system is going to be used. Is it going to be put into the global budget to cover some other debts? Or, like some would like to see, is it going to be transferred to other modes, mainly railway, I don't know. This is not clear in the proposal. Also, what sort of technology is going to be applied for implementing these distance-based systems? There might be technologies using the mobile phone, or sensors, or satellite. There might be different technologies. How are they going to be compatible? There might be different technologies from one country to another, from one region to another. How is that going to work? Also, what would be the cost of implementing those technologies? The timing, some people think that it should be very quick, but the deployment of that technology might take 10, 15 years. And also, if at the end the system is deployed, if it costs 10 and then it only brings 5 in terms of revenue, the principle of finding some financing for the road infrastructure is totally lost. So this is question mark, and the proposal doesn't clearly say anything about that. And another aspect that we consider really very important is that there's a huge risk of transfer of the traffic from paying or charged network onto a non-charged network. And we all know that the non-charged network will very likely be the secondary, let's call it secondary road network, which is the road network which already suffers more of lack of investment and has less capacity to bear this additional traffic. So we are going to, the risk is that most of the traffic will be transferred to that sector, which is already weaker and more fragile than the other, the main road network. So this is a very worrying situation. So as a conclusion, I would say that we think that the approach of the new proposal of the directive is rather positive in its principles, because this user pays principle is something which has a real logic. It is an opportunity to really maintain, improve, and upgrade the road network, giving the citizen and the taxpayer and the road user a proper service, especially if we think about the possible technological developments like Harald mentioned with the automated full autonomous vehicles in the future. We need to have an infrastructure capable of welcoming these vehicles. But again, we don't know exactly. There are still a lot of uncertainties about different elements which are fundamental in terms of timing, the cost, the risk of transfer, and the earmarking, which is quite an important element. Also the fact that this proposal doesn't oblige the member states to apply this system. So if there's no obligation or a minimum obligation to use a road user charging system, we might end up with no effort made to improve and maintain our road network. So thank you very much for your attention.